Good day. In this video, I'm going to show you how to sell yourself in job interviews in 2025. Okay. The first thing you should keep in mind is that the best candidate in a behavioral, or if you want a non-technical job interview, is the one with the best stories. Okay. So in theory, even if you only had one best story, you would spin it with each and every interviewer for any given question. If that one story would be the best when compared to any other candidate, you would score the highest. Okay. Why is this important? Well, it's important because many of you would rather focus on quantity rather than quality when preparing a story bank, right? Now, of course, if you go with one story in a job interview, that would be an exaggeration because they have all sorts of filters. Starting from the natural filters. If I hear a candidate only spinning the same story, whatever question I throw at them, I might, say that, hey, you don't have sufficient expertise in what I'm looking for, or maybe the interviewers would confront their notes, and they would catch you that you're spinning over and over again only your best story. But still, this point is valuable because you should understand that when preparing a story bank and when preparing for a job interview, you should sell yourself on your best stories, right? So when you prepare your story bank, don't just look at the quantitative aspect. Let's try to prepare 20 stories, but rather look also at the qualitative one, in the sense that I found that a story revised at least 3 times tends to be one of your best stories, right? So whenever you're building your story bank, and the main takeaway, you should aim for a 1 to 3 stories to revision ratio, right? So if you have 10 stories, focus on revising them at least 3 times. So so then you realize whether they're your best stories or not, and you can weed out, the stories that are irrelevant and so on and so forth, right? But the first thing you should keep in mind is that you should focus on your best stories. Right, and this will ring a bell also from some other points I'm going to mention throughout this video. Right. The second thing I like to talk about here is that everyone seems to be an expert in behavioral interview these days. Okay. Now, if this would be the case, then I have a quick question for you. How would you go around answering the following question? What's your worst professional regret as of recently? Okay, so take your time, try to find an answer to this question, or you could go with something simpler on the lines, what's your most recent invention? Okay, or if you want, you could even go with how do you deal with conflict as an interview question. In my experience, very few candidates can read between the lines of the question they're getting asked. Okay, so in my first example, what's your worst professional regret? I recently had someone who mentioned their worst professional regret, their failure to get a job for the past 2 years. So I tried that. I tried to get a job for the past 2 years, but it didn't work. Okay, now how would this sell you as the better candidate in a job interview? It won't. It actually works the opposite way, right? Simply because you don't understand why the question gets asked. If you would read the question of what's your worst professional regret, such as what's the best failure story with the most interesting learnings that you prepared for the job interview, that would be something else, right? Or if you would look at the question, what's your most recent invention, as not the most recent one, but the most relevant which you prepared for the job interview, which wasn't, maybe 20 years ago, then that would still be a far better answer than something you invented yesterday because you did something, some extracurricular activity. Right? So long story short, listening skills are something that the vast majority of candidates grossly underestimate when it comes to their importance in their job interviews, and listening skills sell best in behavioral interviews. Right? Point number 3. The AI use case. AI is a huge trend. Okay, I have nothing against accepting this. But you should also understand that the AI use case tends to always be around cost efficiency, right? And in job interviews, in preparing job interviews, there are some things that AI has helped a lot candidates. And I want you to understand why this is important in the context of selling yourself in job interviews, because I believe the context is super important. So if it's become cheaper to do some stuff using AI, methods, such as rewarding your CV maybe, or maybe checking if your answers fit well into the STAR format, right? So if this has become cheap, actually free to check for most of you, if there are far fewer CVs with grammatical mistakes in them, then it means the baseline scenario for what's the bare minimum what you could get away with a CV for a job interview has been raised, because AI has enabled candidates to have their CVs which are better looking and with less grammatical mistakes, for example, right? There's many other things that can improve using AI when it comes to a CV, but that's on the basic side. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because I know that a few years ago I would say that, hey, CVs don't matter when it comes to passing job interviews, whereas nowadays it's more on the lines, okay, but if your CV sucks so bad that it's full of grammatical errors when you could have spent 5 minutes to eventually use AI to tell you what grammatical mistakes to correct there, that will count. Okay, because if an interviewer, even in the final interview round, they see 20 CVs that are good looking and they see your CV, which is extremely bad, poorly written, you can see the candidate did not take any time to present themselves at least in a decent way, that will count. So that's the use case that you must understand for AI and also for the STAR format. The STAR format has never been helping people to land high-paying jobs. It was only to build an interface, an API, so to speak, with people to communicate their answers in their job interviews, and interviewers prefer familiar approaches, and that was, a mutually beneficial relationship. But I'm having a hard time to understand how someone, who on earth would pay you $100,000 per year because you can structure your answers in the STAR format. There's even AI services helping you to structure your answers in the STAR format. Okay, this is an exaggeration, but still the baseline scenario is that, hey, yes, everyone does the STAR answers now, so you should think outside the box and go a bit further, right? So what I'm pitching you here is that expectations evolve, okay, because AI has enabled many more to reach that bare minimum and to push the bar a bit higher in job interviews, okay? Point number 4 I want to talk about here would be it's far easier to read candidates than it used to be. Okay, now, why am I saying this? Well, because there's a trend for interviews to become shorter, not longer. 30-minute interviews have become the norm in job interviews with many companies, with Netflix, Google, and so on, especially in the early stages of the conversation. And this is a trend that you must be aware of, right? Many candidates interpret these 30-minute interviews as a reason for them to hurry up and to deliver their answers quicker. In my opinion, that's a mistake, because interviewing quickly can seriously backfire, and it's the argument that you can speak, if you speak faster, you're more convincing, rarely works. Okay, so my advice to you would be not to hurry in these job interviews. Slower is oftentimes better, and consistently deliver at the same pace. I found this is something many people start very strong and end very weakly. Try to keep a consistent performance, even if it's only if the 30-minute interviews being to your advantage, because it's much harder to keep a consistent performance for 60 minutes than for 30 minutes, right? So also the core reason that interviews have become easier and candidates are easier to read is because you think the AI trend benefits the most the candidates, when in fact it's actually quite the opposite. The AI trend has enabled to weed out the weaker candidates much quicker than you would think. And one of the reasons is because when you put pressure, when you raise the quality bar in the job interviews, when you put pressure on the weak performers, that they tend to easily spill the beans and they tend to quit, so to speak. Right? I noticed this in my coaching sessions. Quite a few people, people who are not reliable, who are never on time to coaching sessions or fail to deliver a bare minimum of what they project, what they promise to prepare for the next interviews, these people never pass interviews. And I suspect this is because of the pressure, the bar constantly raising, which makes it easier for interviewers to screen candidates. Okay, so 30-minute interviews have become a thing, right? And the fifth thing I want to talk about here, which is hugely important if you want to sell yourself best in job interviews today, is that merit-based interviewing has not been so efficient in the past 5 years. Okay, so what I'm pitching you here is that in the past 5 years, it was a candidate-driven market, so you could get away, with even if it didn't completely make sense in everything you said, they would say, hey, yes, but he has potential. Nowadays, it's more of, can you do the job? Are you good at what you say you do? Is your subject matter expertise sound? And it's very interesting to observe this trend because I was never able to correlate so well answers from people that I like with success when compared to previously. Previously, you could more easily bluff during these job interviews. It would have been considered, something acceptable. Nowadays, in my experience, bluffing can seriously backfire in these job interviews because, in my opinion, the quality of these interviews is raising because as there are fewer opportunities, they can also assign their best interviewers for the job, right? So try to sell yourself on merit, on what you can do, how you are an exceptional candidate based on your functional expertise primarily. And yes, you could also supplement that with the behavioral or the non-technical interviewing skills. But again, merit-based interviewing works and works best in at least 5 years, as far as I'm seeing. All right, so this is my 5 tips. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.